Hello and welcome to another Record Sport Facebook Live. My name is Daniel Conn. I'm delighted to be joined by Record Sport's Gavin Berry and Scott McDermott. Guys, how are you both?
Very well, thank you.
It's great to be joining both of you. Gav, we're going to be talking all things Rangers today. Obviously a huge week for the club.
Yeah.
Michael Beale's appointment. First of all, just generally, what's your take of Beale's appointment?
Well, I have to say, Daniel, that when we did a Facebook Live, I think you hosted it, myself and Andy Newport, on the day that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst was sacked. I think when we threw out all the names that were there, Sean Dyche and all the different sort of candidates, I did say then that I didn't think they would go for Michael Beale. I thought he was too inexperienced, and so I can't change my mind now. But obviously, as the story developed and time went on, quickly became clear that Michael Beale was the number one choice. So we'll just need to wait and see how it goes now. He's been appointed, obviously had his press conference yesterday, streamed live, watched it. I don't think, well, I mean, there's no doubt about it, it didn't have the wow factor, certainly not Steven Gerrard, maybe not even quite the excitement of Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, but I think that was to be expected because, you know, you're dealing with someone who was already at the club before in a different capacity. There's no getting away from it. You know, fans weren't really overwhelmed when it became clear that Beale was the number one choice. But you know, that's not to say it can't be a good appointment. I mean, myself and Scott are a wee bit young. I don't know, Scott, you maybe tell me better, but if you go back to 1991, when Graham Souness left and Walter Smith was appointed, how the excitement levels have been then. I mean, were people sort of, you know, were they hoping for a bigger name on the back of Souness? And look how that worked out. So, look, he's got plenty experience, certainly in football at different levels, at big clubs. He's spoken about that himself. He doesn't have experience as a manager in his own right, apart from the short spell at QPR. But as I say, no, the board are obviously confident in him, and we'll need to wait and see how it goes. I think in terms of his actual press conference yesterday, very polished, but you'd expect that. He's always, you know, been a good talker. He's not somebody, I don't think, is fazed by being in front of the camera. But it's all about what happens now. I think he said himself, there's no point in having big talk about what they're going to do. And certainly not in the short term in terms of like a title race. They're 9 points behind. But the question is, can he be his own man at Rangers and be successful as he was ultimately in the end as a coach under Steven Gerrard? And only time will tell.
Mm-hmm. Scott, you were at the press conference yesterday. What did you make of Beale's first kind of appearance in front of the media? Were you impressed, or were you kind of?
I was impressed. Yeah, Daniel, very impressed. A very good communicator, as Gav says, a good talker. He's no shy on giving opinions on stuff. Answered every question really well, even a few difficult ones thrown in about his QPR exit and things like that. What I would say, the thing I took most from it was probably, I think there's a kind of perception of Michael Beale, and I probably bought into it a wee bit, because he was a first-team coach and seen as this kind of coaching guru, if you like, that well, maybe these guys are just a bit kind of, a bit flowery at times, a bit kind of, it's all about philosophies and projects and stuff like that. And I think that perception's been kind of built up. Where I was quite surprised, having now spoken to him and interviewed him and being in his company, is that he's got a bit more steel than I thought. No, he's got a bit more character, a bit more personality about him than I probably was giving him credit for a few weeks ago. And I think a few people would have been like that if you didn't know him and just seen him as this backroom coach, albeit a very talented one. The question is, could this guy, has he really got the personality, that kind of steel to be a manager? As I say, after yesterday, I think he probably has, and I think that's something he's going to need. I think it's something any Rangers manager coming in was going to need against Ange Postecoglou, who I think is such a big character, big personality. And I think Rangers needed somebody to really go up against that. I mean, aside from it on the pitch, even off the pitch, just having that presence about them. As I say, that's something I didn't automatically give Beale credit for, but I think he's got a bit of that. I think he's got a bit a bit more than I thought, because like Gav, if I'm being honest, he probably wouldn't have been my first choice. I thought at this particular time, this Rangers squad needed somebody like Sean Dyche. He would have been my number one choice for them as manager, and that's purely, as I say, looking at this squad. What do I think this squad need in terms of a manager at this time? I thought Dyche ticked a lot of boxes just in terms of that aura, that presence, that no-nonsense kind of style. And I thought Beale was going to be the opposite of that. But as I say, I've changed my tune a wee bit, because after speaking to him yesterday, as I said, I actually think he's got a wee bit of that, and I think that can only be a good thing for these players.
And that's the thing about this, Scott. I mean, obviously you had the benefit of meeting him yesterday, so you have now sort of, changed maybe what your initial opinion was. That's the thing we have to say. When I was asked right away, Daniel, when Van Bronckhorst was sacked that day, to me, it was like inexperience. He's only been a manager for 22 games, and he'd lost 4 of his last 5 and all that. But what you have to accept, what we have to accept is that the Rangers board worked with this guy for 3.5 years, Ross Wilson, Stuart Robertson, whoever else. They know him. So you've got to accept that they're in a position where they can judge better than we can. So all these things that Scott's talking about, they would have known that already. Scott then forms that opinion when he meets him just for half an hour yesterday or whatever it is. So you've got to take that into consideration. They knew what they were appointing. They would know that he was Steely and what he could do, and that, and you've got to accept that.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is because I think the last thing these players need at the moment is somebody to get in and be their pal, basically, because they're trying to chase down Celtic. They've got a 9-point deficit in the league. They're under real pressure, to go and win trophies. They've had that embarrassing Champions League exit already this season. It's been a really poor start to the campaign. I don't think these players need somebody to get in and put an arm around their shoulder. I think some of them need to be told, you're not performing at the level where you should be, and I'm going to change that. And if that doesn't change, then you'll not be here any longer. And I thought that's something that Sean Dyche or somebody of that ilk might have brought immediately. And that was that was where I had doubts or reservations about Beale. Would he go in and, as I say, just say all the right things, and as I say, just try and be. There's that familiarisation there, which I don't necessarily think would be a good thing, or I didn't think that initially. But just for listening to him the last few days, I don't think he is going to be pals with the players. I don't think that's part of the plan. Of course, he'll try and get a smile back in their face and try and get them playing to their true potential again, and try and get a wee bit of feel-good factor, because any manager would need to do that, because the place is, that dressing room must be in the doldrums just now, just with how everything's went this season. So he'll try and lift the place. But he said a couple of things yesterday, talking about looking in these players' eyes and seeing if they've got it in them and stuff. I like that, because I think a few of these players who are grossly underperforming at the minute need a few home truths. And as I say, by the sounds of it, Michael Beale's going to give them that. And as I say, for Rangers going forward, I think that's an absolute must.
Yeah, it's hard to know how much of this you can tell just reading between the lines, Scott. I mean, maybe you can elaborate a bit more on this. I mean, you were there, but just from what he said, it's pretty clear. I think if the camera wasn't rolling and you were sitting down with him with a coffee and you got a few, home truths from the likes of Michael Beale and the board about what they thought of Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, I think it'd be pretty eye-opening, because you could tell even in what they were saying, about the style and, about the fitness and different things. It's pretty clear. I mean, he said that, people think that it's completely broken, and it's not. Yeah. It's not. So he obviously thinks that these players will be suited to a different style, not the style that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst was implementing.
Yeah. Well, he said yesterday in the broadcast, he said he actually asked the players, what style do you prefer? And they answered him, and he didn't want to reveal the answer. And then he almost kind of backtracked a wee bit by saying, they did like certain things that had been going on. So, like you say, you're reading between the lines, and listen, the only thing you can take for that is that players weren't happy with how it was going under Gio. And I've got a bit of sympathy for Gio, in various aspects of it, but he did make some mistakes, some poor decision making, and I just think there's no getting away from the fact, for whatever reason. And it's not to say the players aren't to blame, because ultimately they should be doing what the manager tells them. But I think it's pretty clear. No, going from last season where they were getting to that Europa League final, no, I don't know how it's managed to deteriorate so badly, but clearly Van Bronckhorst wasn't getting a tune out of these players, wasn't getting a response from them. And I think already, again, reading between the lines with what Beale's saying, I think almost instantly he's went in and kind of lifted the place and get it going. And for what I've heard, just you hear wee things, wee rumours. I do think the training has changed this season for whatever reason, whether it was Van Bronckhorst want to change the style, try and make more of his own imprint on the team and the way they're playing. I don't know, but from what I hear, the training was a bit less intense, a bit more passive at times, a bit slower. And maybe these players just haven't reacted to that. And I definitely think it'll be different under Beale. He's already hinted that in a few interviews that he's given, that he's quickened the pace up. And if they don't adhere to that, then they're going to have problems. So I definitely think there's been a change. But you're right, Gav. I think for whatever reason, the players, they weren't responding to Gio or his methods, and they needed a change. And obviously it's come.
That's why in the short term, certainly for the here and now, Michael Beale, you can see the sense in that appointment for the here and now, because he worked with so many of the guys that were already there, as he said, Connor Goldson. We hear that he loves Glenn Kamara as a player who hasn't been performing, Morelos, Kent, all these other guys. So actually in the short term from now till then, he can get these guys all playing again to the system that they enjoyed when he was there before under Steven Gerrard. I suppose the challenge for him long term comes when, you've got to then totally perform surgery on the squad and bring in your own players and all that. That's where it becomes a different challenge for him. He's got to show that he can spend the funds wisely and all that. That's something we don't really know about him. Being a good coach.
I totally agree. I think short term won't be an issue. I mean, you're trying to predict things. This might be totally wrong, but even now, I can see them getting into that Hibs game and just blowing Hibs away in that first game, because it's a nighttime game. The fans are back after a break. Yeah. It's a new manager. Yeah. I can see them absolutely flying at the traps that night and getting a big result. I don't think short term will be the issue, as Gav says. I think long term is the issue. Two things. One, as Gav says, this squad, no matter what way you look at it, is going to need restructuring in the summer. Michael Beale has really got no experience of that as a number one. So that's going to be a big challenge for him. And also, Gav said there about getting them playing the system that they like and playing in Beale's system. That's fine. And again, I think there will be an initial reaction to that. But you need to remember, towards the end of Steven Gerrard's reign, people were criticising that system, criticising the way they were playing, because it was becoming too samey. It was a bit boring. Other opposition teams had cottoned onto it. A lot of talk about these two, the two number 10s coming back and fans are getting excited. That's fine, but by the end of Gerrard's reign, they were complaining about that when they were talking about how people had sussed it out and Rangers weren't getting the best out of them. So he's going to need to refresh it. And I don't doubt he will, because everything you hear about him as a coach, and he is a modern day coach, he's not going to just have one system, I don't think, or one way of playing. And even if he does, there'll be tweaks within that. He's no daft. He's not going to come in and just do the exact same as he did under Steven Gerrard and expect it just to flow short term and long term, because I just don't think that will happen. So it is going to need to be changed up. The squad has actually changed as well. Remember, since he was last here, he's got a few different players. He's got players coming back for injury. He's going to try and integrate. So I do think it'll be a bit different. But as Gav says, that's going to be the big long-term challenge. How does he restructure this squad into his own kind of vision and his own mould? And also, as I say, they need to come up with a system. It can't just be the exact same as what he did under Gerrard, because, as I say, towards the end, that wasn't working. So it's going to need to change up again.
And Gav, two of the players that will be top of his list to kind of get sorted, for want of a better phrase,
Oh, yeah.
is Ryan Kent and Alfredo Morelos. I mean, anyone watching Gio's last game against St Mirren would be forgiven for thinking that's the last time Morelos would play. Really,
Yeah.
his performance was that poor. But do you think Michael Beale, the kind of freshness, the breath of fresh air he's brought in, is he the guy that could maybe get them back on track?
Well, that's what you would think. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that the sort of short clip, I think the other day we might have been in, Daniel, when we watched it, the sort of short clip that was put out on the club's social media channel was of Ryan Kent, a great finish in training, and he was looking sharp and all that. I think Morelos might have actually laid it off at the end of a kind of well-worked move. I don't think it's any surprise that was kind of put out, because that's obviously the image that they want to put out, that here's a guy that was struggling and he's got his zip back. So, look, I think the simple answer is yes. I mean, you would like to think that two guys who respect, Michael Beale so much, then they would raise their game. Should it really take that? Probably not, but that's life and that's football. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're going to. There's managers that players will just run through brick walls for. I think they will, but that's fine. Short term, long term, they've only got 6 months left in their contract. Is that going to be enough for them to sign new deals? I'm not so sure. I think possibly the two of them have maybe just their time at Ibrox has come to an end.
Mm-hmm. I'll be staggered if Morelos is there beyond the end of the season, and I'd even be surprised if he does lift his game to a level where he's playing regular under Michael Beale, if I'm honest. As you say, Daniel, I mean, that St Mirren game, for me, had to be the last straw for Morelos. I mean, that it was a shocking performance, not just in terms of what he did on the ball, just his attitude and his behaviour on the pitch. Yeah. I thought was appalling that day. Now, like Gav says, I don't doubt Beale will have an immediate influence on him, and Morelos might be glad he's back. Who knows? But I don't think it's going to be enough to get him back playing regularly in this Rangers team, and then even tempt the club into offering him a new deal. I just don't see it. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence that Beale in the last couple of days, he's actually spoke about Kemar Roof more than he has Alfredo Morelos. Mm-hmm. I think that tells a story in itself, that he probably sees he probably sees Roof as more his central striker than he does Morelos. He's been asked about Morelos a few times and hasn't gone into any great detail at all about him. I just think Morelos' time's up. I disagree with Gav slightly on Kent. I actually think it might be the opposite with Kent. I get the impression from what Beale's saying that he will make it a major priority to get Ryan Kent on a new contract. Now, I don't know what Ryan Kent's thinking or his representatives, so I don't know if there's a real willingness there to stay. But I think Beale coming back will be a major boost to Kent. I think Michael Beale's already said he's known him since he was 10 years old. He knows his parents and stuff like that. And when you think about the progression in Ryan Kent, no matter what you think of how he's playing now or how he's played the last year or so, when Rangers signed Ryan Kent, he couldn't get a game with Bristol City. To think 3 years later he's man of the match against Borussia Dortmund away from home and helping Rangers get to a Europa League final, that to me was down to Steven Gerrard and Michael Beale, that development in him, and I think Ryan Kent will know that. It's just where these two parties are at the moment in terms of what the club can offer him, what Kent's thinking about his future. But again, you're just trying to read between the lines, and from everything Beale has said, I think he'll try everything in his power to keep Ryan Kent at Rangers. And listen, I think that would be a good thing. Kent's got his critics in terms of numbers and stuff. I've criticised him myself at times for not producing enough in terms of end product, goals and assists. But I do think he's one of these players that you probably won't realise how good he is until he's not there, when you get somebody in to try and replace him. And I think the last couple of games of Van Bronckhorst's reign, Kent actually stood up and was counted in a few of the games when other players were hiding and no performing. I think Kent actually came to the fore.
I was thinking the midweek game against Hearts. That's right.
100%.
That game, yeah. Well, second half.
And the St Mirren game.
And the St Mirren game, yeah.
They get the penalty.
Yeah, that's of course, yeah. So
I think, as I say, I just think Kent, he divides fans, I think, at times. But as I say, I think when you come round, if you let a guy that talent go for nothing, and then you're going to try and replace them, I think it's a big job. I think if you've now got a manager who has proved they can get the best out of Ryan Kent, you've got him in the building now. As I say, he's known him since he was a kid. He knows the family. There's a real connection there. I now think there's a real possibility or a real prospect that Rangers could sit down with Ryan Kent and get him to sign a new long-term deal. And as I say, personally, I think that would be a good thing. The opposite of Morelos, obviously.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, Gav, Beale's taking the job right in the cusp of the January transfer window. We've talked about obviously the longer term at the end of the season, lots of players out of contract. Do you imagine Beale doing a lot of business in January?
Well, I think Ross Wilson said there'll be funds there. You know, we'll try and make something. I don't know if the answer was overly convincing, was it? I mean, I don't think it'll do a lot. I don't think there'll be a lot of business done in January, I have to be honest. I mean, I think the key thing is going to be getting, and he rhymed them off. I mean, you just forget the number of injuries, you know, that Rangers have had. I mean, when he starts to rhyme those players off, you know, like Hadji and Tom Lawrence, and you know, even I mean, John Souttar, we haven't seen, you know, start of the season. Ben Davies been out for spells. Yilmaz is out now. Kemar Rufus, Scott mentioned there. I mean, and there's more. Sorry, Philip Hollander, yep. Did I say Tom Lawrence? I mean, he's obviously the big one because of all the summer signings, he was the one that started. So I think that is a priority. I think once you get all these players back fit again, I think actually the squad is okay, but underperforming. So I think if you get these players playing, get them fit, and if Michael Beale can get them playing to their, you know, peak form, then I think that they're in pretty good nick, to be honest.
I think short term, he'll maybe try and make one or two tweaks in January. As Gav said, I don't think it'll be wholesale or no kind of radical changes, but I get the feeling he says he's assessing the current squad at the moment. I think he'll probably assess it and see that one or two isn't quite up to the level that he's looking for, and maybe try and move them out in January, whether that's on loan or selling them. And there's no doubt every manager will have one or two players in mind that he'd like to try and get in immediately that he thinks will strengthen the squad. Whether the funds are available to do what he wants to do, I'm not sure. I mean, money's obviously going to be tight, but I think come January he'll probably want one or two in if he can. As I say, I don't think it's a necessity because Gav says as long as he gets bodies back, real quality, the likes of Hadji and Lawrence and Roof in particular, they're probably three that you know are proven, and if you get them fully fit, they can be real assets to you. But I think there'll be one or two positions he's looking at for ahead to January and thinking I could maybe change it up a wee bit.
I mean, he knows that market, you know, he knows the sort of championship market and all that down south so well, doesn't he? I mean, you can imagine, you know, a couple of loans even. Yeah. But I really think it's vital for him to get a fast start because, I mean, there is no getting away from it. There a large chunk of the fans initially weren't convinced, you know, by the appointment of Michael Beale. And I think for that reason, he really needs to get off to a flyer. Just to ease any of those doubters. But as Scott said, I mean, there is a good opportunity for that. Hibs at home, Thursday night. You know, we've had a month off. Everybody should be raring to go. He's given the place a lift. There's no excuse, really, not to get off, you know, to a flyer. Because if he doesn't, it's only going to get harder. I mean, if he starts to struggle, if he loses any more ground, already 9 points behind. I mean, you've got a real danger when the gaps like that of the season just going like that. I mean, a bit like we saw it in the season when Rangers won the league. You know, they got that gap, built up a really big gap on Celtic, and then, you know, Rangers won the Old Firm game and they stretched so far, and it ends up 25 points. I mean, that can happen. It can happen easily. A couple of games. So he needs to really eat into that gap quickly.
Mm-hmm. And Scott, he's still in. I mean, he's still in both domestic cup competitions. Obviously, Aberdeen in the League Cup semi next month, the Scottish Cup to come. As Gav says, it's obviously about making Rangers competitive again in the second half of the season. Beale said himself yesterday, obviously the overall target is to get the 56th title as soon as possible. Between now and May, is it really just that, getting Rangers back to win games week in, week out?
I think it is, but I do think the cups are vital.
Yeah.
Daniel, I thought it was a great piece with Alec McLeish a couple of weeks ago in the Daily Record when he spoke about the comparison when he came into the club when Martin O'Neill's Celtic were totally dominating. At the point he came in, the league was pretty much beyond him. And he thought, no, I need to win a cup just to get fans on board, because there was a bit of scepticism about McLeish coming in amongst supporters back at that time as well. And no, he didn't just win one cup; he won both of them. Beating Celtic along the way, and that really gave them so much of a lift that they went on to win a treble the next season. So I think it's absolutely crucial, and Beale must know that. He admitted yesterday, the cup record hasn't been good enough, and that obviously goes back to when he was there under Steven Gerrard, and there was some really poor cup exits to the likes of St Mirren, St Johnstone, Aberdeen at Hampden obviously sticks out as well.
Aberdeen at Ibrox as well.
Aberdeen at Ibrox, of course, yep, that's right. So some really bad exits in the cups, and Rangers, that just can't happen for Rangers, especially in the situation that they're in now. I mean, nobody's going to give up the league. As Gav says, 9 points, it's a big gap, but things can happen. Stranger things have happened. So they need to start immediately winning league games. Beale spoke about it himself. It's not so much about the Old Firm game, it's about beating. They need to get back to beating everybody else first and foremost, and then these games will take care of itself. But I think cup competitions are crucial, and it's something that he should really be focusing on. Not just for the pleasure it will give supporters this season, but the lift they could get getting into next season, when he is going to have to restructure this squad, put his own kind of imprint on it. So I think that the League Cup, certainly this semi-final against Aberdeen coming up, and also looking ahead, he's got a tricky Scottish Cup tie away to St Johnstone as well.
They never got the headlines this week, but they could have done without that draw. I mean, it's just what when you look in the fourth round of all the draw. I mean, you could have been home to a junior team or anything, but I mean, away to St Johnstone, where they just lost last month. Although, having said that, maybe that's a perfect opportunity. You go up there. I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. You either go, oh God, here we go again, or you go the other way and you just go up and say, right, let's go. And
I think in any other circumstances, you'd be thinking, right, it's not an ideal draw, but no, you would take it. But as you say, given what happened a few weeks ago, when they came out the hat together, you're thinking, oh, no, that's the last thing they needed. But so he's got a tricky tie. As I say, the semi-final will not be easy because Aberdeen are obviously in good form as well. Good players, and obviously the St Johnstone tie away from home is going to be tricky. But I think real emphasis has to be put on the cups now, without taking their eye off the league, obviously. But if he can get to the end of the season winning one, maybe two trophies, I think it will help Beale massively in the eyes of the supporters getting into next summer.
I think those games are 1 week after the other, am I right? I think one might be January. So, I mean, what a huge 7 days for him.
And I think Gav, just on that, Scott makes a brilliant point, I think, about the Aberdeen game, because not only will you get Rangers to a cup final, but with all due respect to Kelly, if you expect Celtic to see off Kelly in the other semi, gives Rangers an early crack at Celtic to kind of show, let Beale put a marker down and show, look, we're back kind of thing.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's, I think Scott really summed it up perfectly. He's right. He highlighted that season when Alex McLeish came in after. It was very, very similar circumstances in terms of the mood. The league was gone. I mean, the gap was much bigger then than it is now. I mean, there is a very small chance that they could get back into this title race. But absolutely. Bert Conterman's goal against Celtic, memorable, and that was in the semi-final. And then the Scottish Cup was
that the Barry Ferguson free kick?
That was that one. So it was a dramatic game, ding dong. But yeah, they did. That Alex McLeish came in, just as Scott said, just show that we're not going to be pushed around anymore, and that's what they did. They stood up to Celtic, and even just psychologically gave them the belief that they needed to show next season we will compete with you, and they did.
it put a marker down. No, O'Neill's team we're seeing then has been pretty much unbeatable domestically, and it's beginning to look that way with Postecoglou. So Beale's going to quickly need to put his stamp on it, and as I say, put a marker down to say, look, you're not going to get this all your own way. I'm now coming in with my style, my players. We're going to win a cup or two, and we'll be ready to go next season, challenging for the league. That's what McLeish did, and it's what Beale's going to have to do in this short spell.
Guys, I think one thing that's for sure is that it won't be boring. Whatever happens, I think it's going to be a roller coaster ride, as it always is in Scottish football. Scott, Gav, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us. I should say for everyone watching, you can obviously find us on Twitter at record_sport. And you can follow the weekly Record Rangers podcast at dr_Rangers. Scott, Gav, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Daniel.
Thanks for watching. Cheers. Bye.